This episode of RealAg Radio is brought to you by Ag Expert. Go from field to farm with Canada's most trusted, most secure farm management software. Ag Expert keeps you on top of it all, no matter where you are. Get started for free at agexpert.ca.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Sean Haney, your host here on this Monday edition of the show. Hey, thanks so much for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a part of your workday. This is the time when you're in the tractor a lot. They got a great lineup on Rural Radio 147. Make sure you just don't tune into our show. Check out the entire lineup. The ag programming all day long. That's the industry I know you love. You love learning about it, hearing about it, and understanding what's happening out there in the broader context of our industry, because there is a lot happening right now. Also, appreciate everybody listening on the RealAg Radio podcast as well, wherever you are doing so. Great to have you with us. Okay, it is Agronomic Monday today. We're going to hear a conversation with Dr. Peter Sikkema. He's with the University of Guelph, Ridgetown campus, talking about multiple levels of herbicide resistant when it comes to Canada fleabane. Definitely one of our big troublesome weeds that we have to try to deal with. Also, we're going to hear from Marissa Robitaille Balog, an agronomy specialist in Southern Alberta with the Canola Council of Canada, talking about pre-emerge herbicides with your canola crop. And Peter Pete Johnson will also be with us here today to talk. I got a whole bunch of things to ask Pete about. So it's going to be a fun show today. Looking forward to it. If you have any feedback on today's program, easy to do, simple, and multiple ways to do so too. There's some options here. You can send me an email. That is shaney@realagriculture.com. There's also all the different social media channels for all you techies out there, YouTube and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, as well as we are on TikTok. We've been having a lot of fun with some of the Instagram Reels recently, like taking some of the video content that we produce for RealAgriculture.com and putting it in Reels. And we've received some really good feedback on it too. So check us out there on Instagram. Or the RealAg feedback line, also easy. You just call the number 855-776-6147. You press the number 3 and you leave me a voicemail. You don't need, because some people, they get sort of stage fright, right? Where they don't want to call into a radio show, or, when you do call into a radio show, a lot of times they put you on hold for a really long time. We don't do that. All you got to do is dial 855-776-6147, press the number 3, and you just leave me a voicemail. Super easy, super efficient. And you can go on with your day. But we do want your perspectives and your thoughts, and maybe it's questions or suggestions, whatever it is. Just reach out. We'd love to hear from you. Had a great weekend. Now, it's hard to believe. Get this. Like, I don't feel that old. But I went to my youngest son's high school graduation. Oh, man. It's like oh, yeah. So it was a great time. We had a lot of fun. It was. It's always if you've had a kid, or maybe some of you had a grandson or a granddaughter that has graduated from high school. It is just a really cool experience. You start to think back on how fast time goes, because your own graduation feels like it wasn't that long ago, right? And you look at those kids and they're just, they're so young. We weren't that young when we were in grade 12, were we? And you sort of think about where you thought, and maybe for some of you, you have achieved everything. Like, how they do they do the walk across the stage, and Joe wants to be a farmer, or Joe wants to be an accountant, or Joe wants to be a lawyer, and they kind of do that, right? And what the kids' aspirational dreams are. And in some cases, it probably is extremely accurate and works out. Sarah wants to be a teacher, or, Sarah wants to be a farmer or a rancher or whatever. I'm somebody where, this Didn't have this one on the bingo sheet. This was not on the bingo card. Want to host a radio program that is broadcast across North America and have all these podcast listeners and people going to our YouTube channel. Not on the bingo card. That it was not. I don't even know what mine was. It just wasn't this. Boy, and I'm glad this is what happened. But yeah, it's we just never know, right? And especially nowadays, kids take their careers in numerous paths. I've mentioned on the show before, but I heard this speaker talk about how if somebody who's in high school today, or I think it was college, if somebody's in college today, they could have like a new career every 2 years through their career. That's crazy, right? Crazy. But I guess the advantage of that is if you start doing something and you don't really like it, it's much more acceptable now to shift and move, and you should. The days of being stuck doing something your entire life, we spend a lot of time working, and to do something you don't really love doing, it's a long life. Even if the pay was really good. There's people out there working in industry that wish they farmed, right? And they work in industry to try to build up enough money or cash flow so that they actually can get into farming or expand the farm. It's supplementary income. We have a lot of off-farm income. And I know there are some of you, we don't talk about this a lot. There's some of you that are farming and maybe you had other dreams and aspirations, right? That happens too. So it's, but yeah, it was a good time to reflect on the weekend and think about kind of where life has gone, and just, man, getting up there. When you've got a kid, when your youngest is graduating high school, it does make you sort of, do a bit of an inventory. Where are we at? Right? Anyway, it was a great weekend, and congratulations to my son Carson for his high school grad there on the weekend. Let's take a break. When we come back, let's get into the agronomy. That's right. We're going to hear from Dr. Peter Sikkema, University of Guelph, Ridgetown campus. When we come back, you're listening to RealAg Radio on Agronomic Monday.
Boron is an essential micronutrient for plant growth, and without boron, your crops can't absorb the macronutrients they need for higher yields. Although borates occur naturally, boron deficiency is a common soil problem. Whether in direct soil application, through fertigation, or as a foliar spray, US Borax has the right refined product for your crops. US Borax products are specifically formulated to combine with other fertilizers, lowering your application costs. Learn more at borax.com/ag.
How's your seed quality? What should you treat with? What about herbicide carryover and environmental concerns? Spring is here, and you've got a lot of things to think about in regards to your pulse crop. The Pulse School on Real Agriculture has information and advice for all these questions and more to help you navigate this season. Brought to you by BASF. Pulse School episodes are available at pulseschool.com, realagriculture.com, or as a podcast on your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Agronomic Monday. This segment's brought to you by Granubor. From US Borax, ask for it by name. Go to borax.com. Well, weed resistance is a big issue, okay? It is in the U.S., it is in Canada. Depending on where you are in Canada, you're going to see differences in terms of some of the weeds that we're really, really battling. Well, Bern Tobin of Real Agriculture happened to be able to sit down with Dr. Peter Sikkema of the University of Guelph, and they talked about dealing with weed resistance when it comes to Canada fleabane. Big problem. Solutions are hard to come by. Here's the conversation with Dr. Sikkema.
Sir, how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Now, we're going to talk about weed resistance and managing weeds. Obviously, Peter's, especially his entire career, and, that race against resistance. And I want to talk about multiple herbicide-resistant Canada fleabane. That's something that you've been following for years now. Peter, talk about, I guess, that spread across Ontario.
Yeah, so glyphosate-resistant Canada fleabane was first confirmed in Ontario from seed collected in 2010. And all we knew at that time is that there was 8 fields in Essex County adjacent to the Michigan border with glyphosate-resistant Canada fleabane. And by 2015, so 5 growing seasons later, multiple herbicide-resistant Canada fleabane, resistant to both Group 2 and 9 herbicides, or you could say it was resistant to Roundup as well as first rate. It was found from Essex County, adjacent to the Michigan border, to Glengarry County, adjacent to the Quebec border, and almost everywhere in between.
Right. Now, over the years, you've been studying products and, tank mixes and various other things and strategies. And I want to just go through corn, soybeans, and wheat and what you're recommending these days to tackle that resistance. Start us off with corn. What's your recommendation there?
So we did 2 series of experiments looking at Canada fleabane control in corn. The first series of experiments looked at pre-plant herbicide options, and the second was looking at post-emergence herbicide options. In terms of the pre-plant herbicide options, the 2 herbicides that gave the best control were either Integrity or Acuron, and they provide, greater than 95% control of fleabane. And let's say you have the situation where you didn't get the fleabane controlled prior to corn emerging from the soil, and now you have to look at post-emergence options. There's really 3 groups of herbicides that you can use post-emergence in corn. The first one is a really old tank mix. It's Partner plus atrazine. It's a Group 6 and a Group 5 herbicide. Then you have a number of different Group 4 herbicides that are quite effective. Things like Lawntrel, Enlist Duo in Enlist corn, and then the dicamba-based herbicides, whether you buy it as XtendiMax, Ingenia, Distinct, and so on. And then finally, you have the Group 27 herbicides that are quite effective, things like Acuron, Callisto, Lotus, or Shield-X. So that's really of a benefit to Ontario farmers because you have different herbicides from different herbicide groups that all provide greater than 90% control, and that allows growers to change their herbicide choice, change the herbicide group so that they don't use the same herbicides with the same mode of action repeatedly.
Right. Now, what about soybeans? Again, you always talk about a 2-pass program always being the best option. You just talked about some pre and some post products there. Same story in soybeans?
So that really depends, Bernard. If you're growing IP or Roundup Ready soybean, you have to have fleabane controlled before the crop emerges from the soil. So it is a 1-pass program. And in the research that we've done, the best way to manage multiple herbicide-resistant Canada fleabane and soybean is with a pre-plant burn down of Roundup plus Aragon plus Metribuzin. You could buy it as Sencor, Tricor, or in numerous other herbicide offers in the province. And in our trials, that 3-way mix will provide 95% plus control. In contrast to that, if you're in Extend soybean or E3 soybean, then you could use a 2-pass program. You could still start with something like Roundup plus Aragon plus Sencor, or possibly another burn down, and then come back with dicamba-based herbicide in Extend soybean, or Enlist 1 or Enlist Duo in E3 soybean. So in those 2 traded crops, you could use a 2-pass program. If you're an IP or Roundup Ready, you are stuck. You've got to have it clean before the crop emerges.
What about wheat? What's the situation in wheat now?
Yeah, and so a really good question. And in terms of winter wheat, up to about 5 years ago, I always said that Ontario farmers only had 1 herbicide for the control of multiple herbicide-resistant Canada fleabane and wheat, and that was Infinity. However, in 2023, there are more offers available, and they would be Infinity, Infinity FX, Pixaro M, and Lawntrel, and all of them provide comparable control of glyphosate-resistant Canada fleabane in winter wheat. I would say that we did trials where we looked at fall applications of those herbicides, spring applications, and a sequential, and you get better control with the spring application of those herbicides, and it's simply because more of the fleabane has emerged at the time of application. In contrast, even though you get poorer control, it's 80 to 95% with applying those herbicides in the fall. Winter wheat yield is higher with the fall application, even though you get lower control, let's say on July 1 of the following growing season. And it's because of that early weed interference, early weed competition. So if you have heavy fleabane pressure in winter wheat, you should consider putting on a fall application.
Right. Now, a lot of your conversations in your presentation today was about herbicide options, but you did talk about some other management considerations and talk about tillage. Obviously, there's a role to play for tillage here.
Right. And so in terms of multiple herbicide-resistant Canada fleabane, aggressive tillage, could be one component of a weed management strategy. And I use the word aggressive. We have done trials where we looked at tillage for control of fleabane, and even where we had 3 passes with a cultivator with a rolling basket harrows, it still wasn't 100%. So it has to be very aggressive.
Final question for you, and that final point you were talking about, and that was cover crops. More and more cover crops here, and you see a role in them for managing that resistance.
Yeah, and I found that research really encouraging. I do want to give credit where credit's due. The research was completed by Tega Collette while she was a graduate student in my program, and she looked at multiple different cover crops, either seeded just with one cover crop or a mixture of 3 or 4 different cover crops, and a cover crop planted after winter wheat combining. So let's say you plant or you combine your wheat around August 1, you plant your cover crop on August the 10th. It's surprising how effective a cover crop is at suppressing Canada fleabane emergence and growth in the fall. And when we planted corn the year after the cover crop was planted after winter wheat combining, there was near perfect control of the Canada fleabane, during, let's say, the month of April and into early May. I do want to stress that even though you got excellent suppression of the fleabane, there was late emerging fleabane in the corn crop, and you still had to put on a herbicide post-emergence to control those late emerging Canada fleabane.
That was Dr. Peter Sikkema of University of Guelph at the Ridgetown campus talking about multiple herbicide resistance in Canada fleabane and some of the strategies to overcome it. Definitely a challenge. You talk to somebody from where I am here in Southern Alberta, they'll talk about, resistant kochia. Or some people talk about, resistant wild oats. We, in certain parts, palmer amaranth, of course, is really the mother of all resistant weeds. So this continues to trying to stay ahead of the weeds with some sort of a strategy is important. One thing's for sure, it seems to me, and maybe I should talk to Pete about this later, is, as many of the strategies that we have, we're having a hard time getting new actives registered, or they just don't come out very, very often. It's not like they're just all sitting there waiting for a bunch to get registered. New actives are difficult. And the trouble is that the weeds are kind of winning this battle. And so some people are looking for solutions outside of some of the chemistries, and it's a challenge. We've actually gone back in time trying to pull old strategies out prior to, herbicide resistant crops. Some of those technologies are being used again, like an Avidex, for example, stuff, or Edge, stuff like that. So this is one, because weeds take away yield. There is no question about it. Speaking of weeds, when we come back, we're going to talk about pre-emerge herbicides when it comes to canola. You're listening to RealAg Radio here on Agronomic Monday, and we'll be right back right after this.
Infuse some energy into your next corporate event, customer meeting, or conference with RealAg Radio, Canada's national agriculture radio show. Create a unique experience at your next event with host Sean Haney, broadcasting RealAg Radio live on SiriusXM, featuring exciting guests, captivating interviews, and the latest news from the agriculture community. Contact advertising at realagriculture.com or call 587-787-1795 to book your on location with RealAg Radio today.
As you head out into the field this season, The Corn School's got you covered. Everything from tillage discussions, weed control info, field trial results, yield strategies, and more. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF. Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast from your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
Did you know that Pioneer now has a full lineup of Enlist E3 soybeans? Take a look at Pioneer brand Enlist E3 soybeans for the highest yield potential and for the best agronomic package and herbicide trait options. From the lab to the field, Pioneer brand Enlist E3 soybeans are the best in beans, period. Ask your local Pioneer representative about Enlist E3 beans.
Agronomic Monday, a lot of times we bring up some of the schools, the crop schools that we have throughout the growing season on RealAgriculture.com and our Real Agriculture YouTube channel. And in particular, the Canola School, and we're going to learn about canola here in this segment, but the Canola School is brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola. Big thanks to them for being the exclusive sponsors of our Canola School. You can find all of the episodes by going to canolaschool.com. The best part is, with like Canola School and all of our schools, is that they're on demand. You watch them, you consume them when you want to. We also put them on our Real Agriculture podcast feed as well. So there's lots of opportunities to gather and view and listen to the content and the best part is when you need it, when you have the time to do so. And when you're rolling through the field, putting the crop in, or you're on the sprayer or the combine for that matter, that's kind of the perfect time, I think. I was talking to a farmer on the weekend who was talking about that exactly, that, as they're driving around and making sure that everybody's got all the supplies they need, they've got our podcast on listening to it. So check out the Canola School one for sure. Speaking of Canola School, as I mentioned, we're now going to hear some audio from a recent episode that Kara Oosterhuis of Real Agriculture filmed. And this one is with the Canola Council of Canada. And Kara had a chance to catch up with Marissa Robitaille Balog, who's an agronomy specialist with the Canola Council of Canada in southern Alberta. And they talked about the importance of pre-emerge herbicide in your canola crop. Here's Kara and Marissa.
I have here with me Marissa Robitaille Balog, who is with the Canola Council of Canada. How's it going today?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I am doing good. We're in a field. It is starting to rain, but hey, we're in southern Alberta, and rain in May is not a bad thing. So there we go. We're here to talk, though, about pre-emerge and the importance of spraying a pre-emerge chemical, before that canola actually comes out of the ground. Do you want to kind of talk about what your messaging is there?
Sure. So we think that a pre-emergent herbicide application is really important to help our crop get off to a really successful start at the beginning of the growing season. By controlling weeds early on in the field, you're making sure that they aren't using valuable resources like moisture, nutrients, sunlight, that you want your canola to have access to when it starts coming up.
So talk about how competitive canola actually is off the bat.
So canola isn't super competitive when it's small and when it's early on in the growing stage. Between that cotyledon to four-leaf stage, it's pretty susceptible to those external stressors. So by removing weeds and other pressures like that, you're allowing resources, again, like nutrients and moisture to be accessible for that canola to get off to a good start.
And how could this play into the whole early insect conversation as well, getting that canola off to a good start?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Obviously, moisture and nutrients are what it takes for canola to grow quickly through those stages where it can handle more insect, like flea beetle feeding. So getting it to that four-leaf stage as quickly as we can will help mitigate some of those potential insecticide damages as well.
And do you want to talk about the importance of rotating your chemicals and reaching different groups?
Yes, definitely. So always using a tank mix and rotating your herbicide groups is really important. One other thing I think is really important to touch on is making sure that you're properly IDing the weeds in your field that you want to be targeting, because you want to make sure that you're using the right products to have really good efficacy and control of those weeds. So making sure what you're spraying is what's going to be really good at controlling the weeds. And then some other things to note around when you're choosing a herbicide are making sure that you're paying attention to herbicide label rates, timing, weed staging, and also using really good water volume to make sure that you're getting really good coverage as well.
So now, obviously, we're looking at rotating our crops as well. So if you're on a field that last year had a crazy amount of a certain weed, is that something you're paying attention for next year?
Yes, definitely. Field history is also something to really take into consideration when you're thinking about spraying a pre-emerge. So thinking about different things with that field history is, are you seeing a lot of weeds that weren't controlled very well last year using a certain herbicide group? Is that a red flag that you should be looking out for this year? Or do you know that there's a history of a herbicide-resistant weed already showing up in that field that you need to be aware of?
So what's your number one, I guess, convincing, if a farmer were to come up to you and they say, hey, okay, I'm on the fence, chemical's expensive, why should I spray that pre-emerge? What's kind of your take-home message?
A lot of yield potentially could be lost due to weed competitiveness, taking those nutrients and those resources away from canola right off early on in the growing season, and that can show up later on. Another important thing to consider when you're thinking about spraying a pre-emerge product is if you're able to control those weeds when they're really small, you are much better off than if you wait until they're larger, potentially out of stage, and trying to control them with an in-season herbicide application as well. So having cleaner fields throughout the rest of the growing season is also really important.
Okay, sounds good. Anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think that's really good. One other thing I did want to mention is once you've made the decision to scout and to spray a pre-emerge product, taking another opportunity to go back and look at that field a second time after you've made a spray application is really important. You can look for different things like, are you seeing a second flush of weeds? Is there an area in the field where these weeds didn't seem to be taken out by this herbicide? And if so, why? Was it a spray or miss? Was it a staging issue? Or is there something else going on?
That was Marissa Robitaille Balog with the Canola Council of Canada talking to Real Agriculture's Kara Oosterhuis in a recent Canola School episode. I think Marissa brings up a good point. And we talked about this in numerous applications, is the post-evaluation, right? So going back about a month or so, we were talking about evaluating your plant stand throughout the growing season to make sure that we're not just saying, well, hey, I planted at this rate, and then you kind of make that assumption that that's exactly what happened, right? We got emergence, we got survivability, we got all that kind of stuff. The same goes with killing weeds, right? Why not do that post-evaluation where it's, maybe there's misses, maybe there's, it allows you to evaluate the effectiveness of the strategy that you employed given the conditions of this year. Maybe you push some of the temperature and you want to see how that worked out, right? And kind of tracking that compared to what the conditions were at the time of the application. I think it's good practice. It makes sense. It's kind of that post evaluation, and you can, if you learn some things, maybe it creates maybe more questions in a couple situations. It allows you to carry that forward to next year or the next time, right? Or maybe some of the next fields that you're going to get into. So I think that's a very, very important point that was made there for sure. Before we break, I want to tell you about Alpine Premium Liquid Fertilizers for Canadian farmers. Over the past 50 years, Alpine has developed broad Canadian roots. They strive to maximize fertilizer efficiency to support farmers across the country and in their communities with high-quality liquid fertilizers from start to finish. To learn more, contact Alpine at alpinepfl.com today. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll bring in Real Agriculture's agronomist, Peter W.P. Johnson. We got a lot of stuff to talk about here as we are in the middle of May, and you're in the middle of seeding and planting, and we'll get to that and a whole bunch of other topics when we come back. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, of course, on Sirius XM.
Want to get the best out of your soybean crops? Whether you've been growing them for a generation or are just starting into soybeans, find what you need to know at soybeanschool.com. You'll see videos on growing tips, pest control, and much more from specialists across the region, all in one place. Easy for you to access from your desktop, tablet, or mobile phone. Maximize your yields by staying up to date with the Soybean School, presented by BASF, Pride Seeds, and Syngenta Canada.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Agronomic Monday. Here, are you looking to simplify your sulfur solution on your farm? Get Biosol Premium Plus from GFL Ag, the unique combination of compost and elemental sulfur that provides a cost-efficient, logistically friendly, and agronomically sound, long-term and environmentally friendly sulfur solution to your farm. Learn more by going to gflagra.com. That's gflagri.com. Great to have GFL aboard as a sponsor here on RealAg Radio. Make sure you check them out. You know, our next guest, I know, has a big smile on his face. I know this. He's very happy today. It actually has nothing to do with the weather, which is usually a huge driver of his mood. I know that he finished planting corn and beans over the weekend. He was a busy little bee. Here he is, Peter W.P. Johnson. Hey, Pete, how are you doing?
I'm awesome, Sean, just as you said. Yes. I mean, my acres don't even matter, but it's still so nice to be done. And we finished by just after noon on yesterday, Mother's Day. I was able to get home and spend some time with Sheila for Mother's Day. Life is good on the small acreage that I farm. There's no question about that. Plus, it's sunny, Sean, so I'm even in a better mood.
Why, Pete, why did we do... Okay, just hold on. But before we get into some agronomic topics, why do many of us do what you just did, where it's like, well, yeah, but I'm small acres. Doesn't matter. Pete, it's a part of it. It all adds up. You're just as much... I don't care if you got 50 acres, you got 5,000. You're farming, man.
Well, fair enough, and thank you for that, Sean. But it's certainly a different level of investment if you have 5,000 acres or 25,000 acres than when you're farming 250 acres the way that I am. And so, yeah, I mean, part of the reason I keep farming is because it keeps me honest. It keeps my feet to the fire. I have to know what I'm talking about. We do the research there, and so anybody listening, if I won't do it on my own farm, I will not recommend it to anybody else. So it sort of helps me where the rubber hits the road and making sure that it's a good, sound agronomic practice, environmental benefit, whatever. It really does keep me honest.
Now, temperature-wise, things are starting to heat up here this week. Early part of the week, it's pretty warm in parts of the prairies here. And I think people are going to be, most farmers I've talked to out west, Pete, and maybe excluding parts of Manitoba here where there were some big storms late last week, I believe, on the western side of the province. People are going to be asking for some rain here. And of course, we talked a lot about the Alberta wildfires here on the show, where rain is always welcome in those parts because it's been so dry. But you and I were texting earlier. You're starting to hear from some of the Ontario growers the fact it's dry. Talk about that.
So, Sean, in Ontario, we always want a drought in planting season because we're always excess moisture going into planting. It's just the nature of the beast in all of Ontario. Actually, in most of the Great Lakes Basin, we just get full moisture recharge, and then spring hits, and the best thing we can have is a drought. And we're sort of in a mini drought right now. I don't think it's rained for at least 2 weeks. There's no rain in the forecast until this coming weekend. But the challenge with that is that we've got good drying indexes. We want that. But if you don't do tillage right, then all of a sudden you let that moisture escape. It's dry in that top 2 inches or top 3 inches where you want to put the seed and have some moisture for germination. And you have to be a good tillage manager, or you end up without moisture all of a sudden. Plus, you look at the soil applied herbicides is another situation where if you don't get any rainfall after a soil applied herbicide, you don't get that activation, so you don't get the same level of control. And it always astounds me how it can be totally dry and somehow those stinking weeds still manage to germinate from a quarter or a half inch down, and they're coming. It's like how can I not have enough moisture for the crop? But that stupid ragweed or that foxtail or whatever is still germinating. I don't know. It seems to be, but there's just a bunch of things around this dry weather that growers need to remember and to manage accordingly.
Yeah, we were talking. We had Peter Sikkema from University of Guelph Ridgetown campus. He was talking about some of the weed resistance issues when it comes to Canada fleabane earlier, and we also talked about pre-emerge herbicides on canola. Now, speaking of weeds, one of the things that we heard from Marissa Robitaille Balog from the Canola Council is doing kind of that post check, like after you spray your weeds. Whether that's pre-emerge or in crop, good to do the evaluation. I think that it's kind of a simple piece of advice, but it's a good idea to do that evaluation. What do you think about that?
So Sean, I'm an agronomist. Like that, you don't even have to ask me that question, because in my world, it is scout to know what weeds are there, spray to control those weeds, go back and scout to make sure that the product you used actually worked. And in this case, where it's dry, you go back and say, okay, do I need to hit that with a rotary hoe or some light tillage because I've got heavy weed pressure and my soil applied didn't get activated? Or it's really dry. Do I do something more in my pre-emerge situation with glyphosate or something to try to stop the weeds that are germinating, that we don't need that soil applied activity? Like, there's lots of different ways we can play that. But man, it's the same in wheat, Sean. You got to be out, because now we're starting to see some disease develop. It was actually kind of cool. Paul DeLonge, he's a custom spray operator down in Chatham, Kent County, and he tweeted out that he's seeing some disease start in the wheat crop. He's doing some test plots with the T2 fungicide, and if you don't go look, you don't know what to do. And by the way, I'm not at all convinced that he needs a T2, because he's going to go with a T3. But if he doesn't do the test strip, how do you learn? So it's scout all the time. That's my world.
I'm looking at the forecast right now for London, Ontario. I just randomly picked London, and it's getting down to not to minus, but +1 Celsius on Wednesday. That's a little cool for this time of the year.
So there's a bunch of places in Ontario, Sean, that are forecast at -2.
Ooh.
And those early planted soybeans that we talked about, way back, we planted them kind of in that really nice window in April. A month ago, it was from the 9th of April to the 15th of April. We had 24, 25 degree temperatures, and those beans are up now. And so growers are saying, ooh, -2, that's pretty scary. Plus, we have wheat in head in Essex County now. And so again, you do not want any freezing temperatures. And I don't think Essex is forecast to get that cold. But what's really been interesting is the last 2 mornings in a row, we've had frost on windshields down in the Niagara Peninsula. And they're normally a warm spot, but they must have had no cloud. They must have had cloud through the day and then no cloud at night. And they got that radiative cooling, and they've had frost on the windshield. Man, if that happens in Essex County on Wednesday morning, that's a little bit scary on that wheat crop that's coming into head.
Yeah, we got Guelph at 0 as a low. So I'm having trouble finding -2, but definitely we've got some areas that are definitely at that freezing point, which is
man. I think Arthur was at -2. Like I'm not looking right now, but I looked this morning, and it may have warmed up a degree or two as well, Sean. But there were definitely some minuses in the forecast when I looked this morning.
Now, last week we talked about my dandelion issues in my backyard, which I know everyone's concerned about. And we talked about the need to do fall weed control. You saw a tweet that stood out to you.
Absolutely. So just Kevin had some tweeted out, Kevin Buchner, he had some leftover herbicide in his sprayer last fall. He wanted to put the sprayer away. And so he just went out and he went around the outside of the field and across the headland an extra pass till that herbicide ran out. And he took a picture of that and tweeted it out. And oh my gosh, his caption was, "Looks like I should have sprayed more of the field."
Oh, wow.
Because where he put, it's the difference between brown and solid green, Sean. It's one of those situations where you would just say, how could you have that much difference with that fall herbicide? But that's exactly what he saw. And we see this so many times. I have clients where I will tell them lots of times, like, just go around the outside round of the field. In wheat, we'll get the Canada thistle coming in from the edge. We'll get like dandelions coming in from the edge, perennial sow thistle. And I'll say, the whole field doesn't need sprayed. Just spray the outside round because the weeds keep moving in from the edge. Man, if you have weed pressure, spraying just the edge is not enough. And that's clearly Kevin's case because it was a massive difference, man.
Pete, I don't know what you're doing in June, but coming up quickly here between June 4th and 6th in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, by the way, home of the snowbirds, home of the Canadian snowbirds. Not the snowbirds that go south, the jet snowbirds, the air team. Love them at air shows.
Yeah.
The 110th AGM and convention of the Saskatchewan Stock Growers Association is happening, and registration is now open. Visit skstockgrowers.com. That's skstockgrowers.com for more information and to register. 110th meeting. How many organizations in this country, Peter, having their 110th meeting? That's amazing.
That's incredible, actually. Wow. They started a long time ago, Sean.
Think about that.
Yeah, that would be 1913 they started. Wow.
I'd love to see an agenda. Well,
Nope. Or the minutes from 1913 or 1914. That would be pretty cool.
That would be really cool. Really cool. That's pretty neat stuff. So skstockgrowers.com. Hey, we got to take a break. We've got more coming up here with myself and Peter Repeat Johnson, and we'll be right back right after this quick break. I get to spend every day talking to farmers in the ag industry through RealAgriculture.com and RealAg Radio. But nothing is more fun than speaking to an audience live and in person. If you're planning an ag event, book a Real Agriculture speaker to make it a successful and memorable experience. Email shaney@realagriculture.com and you can book myself or any other Real Ag personality to speak at your event. Bring your audience all the fun, insight, and energy of Real Agriculture.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit CanolaSchool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Monday edition of the show. It's Agronomic Monday, and we're talking to Pete Johnson. Also want to tell you about Granny Bor from US Borax. Ask for it by name. Go to borax.com. Pete, we have lots of topics to try to get through here. I want to ask you about sulfur and wheat and the why. Talk about it.
Yeah, so Sean, I can't believe it because we have talked about this, and it's really cool. Emily Pennington, she's a recent grad from the University of Guelph, and she's working for Hensel Co-op, and she tweets out a picture and tags me in it. So anybody listening, when you see cool stuff, tag Wheat Pete in, because that way I will see it for sure. There's so much on Twitter. I don't always see everything that people think I see, but you tag me, I'm going to see it. She tagged me in. And what a stark difference between where they put the nitrogen and sulfur on versus where they just put straight nitrogen on. And she didn't say why the grower left the sulfur out in that, whether it was a test plot. Hopefully it was a test strip, because, man, the difference was just blow your brains. It's going to be, well, my guess is it's at least a 20 bushel yield hit. And, of course, this, Sean, is because we are getting less and less sulfur out of the atmosphere. We're cleaning up our pollution. That's a good thing, but it means now farmers have to buy sulfur. And so since she sent that tweet out, I have had at least 4 other growers contact me, send me pictures. You know, they send me a picture and say, hey, Pete, what do you think this is? I got some yellow patches in my wheat. I look at it and I say, well, first guess is sulfur. It also might be pH. It might be manganese. And then they come back and say, oh, right, we didn't put any sulfur on that field. I'm going, what? Like, how? Sean, if you farm in Ontario and you grow wheat in Ontario, please remember, you need sulfur on the wheat crop. You also need it on your canola crop. Here in Ontario, I expect it. Well, I know in Western Canada also, unless you soil test, that's okay if you've got enough. But mostly, we need sulfur. We also need sulfur on the hay crop. Like, it amazes me that we're still kind of running into this. It makes a huge difference. And one last quick note, and I'll get off my pulpit. But if you apply more nitrogen, because you look at that yellow wheat and you say, oh gosh, the nitrogen's not working out there, crank on more nitrogen, you actually exacerbate the sulfur deficiency. You can create sulfur deficiency with excess nitrogen applications. And so you just go, oh my gosh, put some sulfur on, make the crop go nice dark green, get the 140 bushel wheat crop. If it is off color at this point in time, do something about it.
Okay, I was just going to ask you the geographical differences. I was just going to ask you about sulfur and spring wheat in Western Canada. Some considerations there for growers.
Yeah, so wheat is wheat is wheat. It needs sulfur. So the only difference is how much sulfur do you have in the organic matter. So with wheat in Ontario, because the sulfur demand on wheat is super early, in our winter wheat, 90% of the sulfur is taken up by the time we hit anthesis. We have wheat in head in Essex County. It is done taking up 90% of its sulfur on the 14th, or today's the 15th, but yesterday it was in head, the 14th of May, and it's got 90% of the sulfur in there. We don't have time for the biology in the soil to work on the organic matter and release that sulfur so that we have sulfur for the crop. With soybeans, because their demand is late, it's more like July and August, we've a lot more time to get that sulfur out of the organic matter. Mm-hmm. With spring wheat in Western Canada, man, if you're out there early and the crop needs it early and the bugs aren't working yet, get some sulfur on there. And by the way, Sean, you can do a sulfur soil test. They don't work really well. They're kind of, if you're going to definitely be deficient, it will tell you that. If you're in the mid-range, it really doesn't tell you very well. So sulfur soil test is less than perfect, but you should also know your fields and know your soils. And if you once a farm goes sulfur deficient, you're growing a crop that needs sulfur, just apply sulfur. Like, just do it. Because
any rules of thumb on the number? Like, if I look at my sulfur levels in my organic matter, what is there, like, some rules of thumb?
So not really. I mean, when it goes deficient, it's deficient. Okay. And I just, right off the top of my head, I can't remember what that number is, Sean, because I can tell you on phosphorus, I can tell you on potash, but because sulfur soil test really doesn't work very well, I think it's something like in that range of 10 parts per million. If you're under that it's deficient. But don't hold me to that, because I'd have to actually look back and make sure that's correct. But it'll tell you on the soil test. If you're deficient, then you need it. If you're in that gray zone, you still might need it, and you just have to make sure it's there.
Now, you and I were going back and forth by email last week, and I actually think I made you mad. And I was just poking you because I enjoy that. I like, I actually like to be ahead of you on stuff too. And we were talking about triticale and how now this is a crop that a lot of people, depending on its geography, right? So some geographies have had a lot of experience when it comes to grazing and for silage and as a feed, and has some flexibility when it comes to even grain yield, especially on the winters, high yielding. But this is something that some dairy farms in Ontario have just kind of caught on to in terms of some of the silage yields out there. You even called it, and this is where I really started to go after you, game changer. So talk about what's going on.
Yeah, it absolutely is a game changer in the dairy industry, not just in Ontario, but in New York State, in Michigan, in the Great Lakes Basin, where there's a lot of the dairy industry. And the reason it's a game changer, and I get that Western Canada, you guys have foraged barley and rye and wheat and triticale forever for beef cattle, but the dairy industry in Ontario, or actually in the whole region, has typically been alfalfa and corn silage. And realistically, up until, 10 years ago, it was all alfalfa based. And what's really interesting in that industry is that we didn't grow a lot of grass in the alfalfa. We wanted pure alfalfa because grasses had higher NDF levels and ADF levels. Those were the tests we were using to look at feed quality. And we had, relative feed value and milk per acre and all these programs. Wisconsin did a lot of work on the milk per acre out of alfalfa. Well, what we've learned as we've evolved through this, and man, dairy nutritionists, and that is such a science, and they've really fine-tuned it. And what they've learned is that even though triticale or rye silage or barley silage, like typically with dairy farmers, it's either triticale or rye because it heads a little earlier, it gives us more options, it's also more tons. But what we've learned is that even though it's got higher NDF levels, the cows can digest it better. And so we now have dairies that don't grow alfalfa at all. It is all now triticale or rye silage and corn silage. And so we've gone from a situation where we're trying to add energy into the high producing cow because we get the protein out of the alfalfa, to now we've got all sorts of energy because we've got high energy corn silage, we've got high energy triticale. And by the way, we want that triticale to also have protein. We want 20% protein in that triticale, but we can buy soy meal to balance the protein to feed that high producing cow. And so it really is revolutionizing. I think that's the word I used, Sean, revolutionizing the dairy industry. And then we bring in, new developed triticales that are higher yielding, like this triticale that we were being tweeted around last week, XTR. Wow, it was far and away higher than the regular triticale that growers were using. It looks like it, at that stage, it could have had another 50% in yield. We haven't seen those yield numbers yet, but man, if we could get 50% more yield out of that triticale, that is a huge impact on the dairy industry here in Ontario.
Yeah, and back in my seed grower days, I spent a lot of time with triticale. I know from a beef perspective, a lot of growers like the reduced on because some nutritionists don't like because the on especially the winter trits can be quite large and quite coarse. So everybody always wanted those reduced on varieties. So yeah,
but you see, Sean, in the dairy case, we're harvesting it before the awns come out, right? We're really harvesting it at boot stage or at flag leaf stage. So the awns don't get a chance to be a problem.
Makes sense. Yeah, very cool stuff. Yeah, we'll have to chat about triticale a little bit more in the weeks going forward for sure. Hey, Pete, have yourself a great week and enjoy it. And hopefully we stay away from some of those chillier temperatures out in Ontario.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope we get some rain, in the forest fire area. Lots of weather related stuff still going on, but get the crop in the ground. It's that time of year, and everybody stay safe.
I didn't even ask you about your Oilers either. Hey, if you have any feedback, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or call the Real Ag listener line. The feedback line is 855-776-6147. Thanks everybody for getting real and getting connected with Real Ag Radio, and we'll chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this episode of RealAg Radio, brought to you by Ag Expert. Go from field to farm with Canada's most trusted, most secure farm management software. Ag Expert keeps you on top of it all, no matter where you are. Get started for free at agexpert.ca.